I'd like to introduce our speakers tonight, and I was delighted a week or so ago to learn that Warren Madden was going to be with us tonight, along with Tammy Koolbeck. So I want to just give a little background on both of our dynamic duo who's going to do our presentation tonight. Tammy Koolbeck has been the executive director of the Iowa State Center since August 2015. She is only the 5th director since the center's buildings opened between 1969 and 1975. Tammy works for the Ames-based company VenueWorks and has been in the industry for over 20 years. Before joining VenueWorks, Tammy managed marketing and programming for a theater, event center, and arenas in Cedar Rapids, in addition to hotel, convention and visitor bureau, and professional sports experience. In 2007, she was awarded the Event and Arena Marketing Conference's highest honor, the Gigi Award of Excellence. I love the name of that award. In July, she will become board chair for the International Association of Venue Managers, a global association with over 6,000 members. That's really impressive. Tammy lives in Ames and has been involved with Leadership Ames, the Ames Community Arts Council, Go Red for Women, Ames Convention and Visitors Bureau, and KHOI. Now, Warren Madden, you know, if we really gave his whole resume, we would be here for an hour. So I'm going to try to give the abbreviated Warren Madden bio. Warren served Iowa State University for 50 years in a number of fiscal and business positions before retiring as Senior Vice President for Business and Finance in 2016. He earned an engineering degree from Iowa State, worked away from Ames for a period of time, received his master's in business, and returned to the campus in 1966. During his tenure, the university's enrollment more than doubled. The campus grew to more than 14 million square feet with 11,500 acres of land under university oversight. He served under 7 Iowa State presidents, administering and presenting fiscal and business issues to the university and community groups and state and national government. He continues to advise the university's economic development and technology transfer efforts and is serving as interim president of the research park. He has served and continues to serve on innumerable boards for both the university and the community of Ames, all of which benefit from his years of experience. He is currently involved with the Drive for the Healthy Life Center. He was named Ames Citizen of the Year in 2013, a well-deserved honor. So those are our 2 presenters, and let's have them come on up and get started. Thank you.
Thanks. There we go. Thanks for coming out tonight. Because of how we have the stage set up tonight, we're actually going to play a short video that talks all about how it got started before we even opened our doors in 1969. I think you might enjoy it. It's actually part of a 30-minute video that you can find on YouTube from the Parks Library Special Collection. Just type in Iowa State Center and you'll see a video that says Then and Tomorrow, and here it is.
We have the usual homecoming events. The display. A queen. And of course, a football game. But it had something more, something that marked a new direction for a university world famed for its achievements in technical and agricultural education. Ground was broken for the multi-million-dollar Iowa State Center. 4 buildings that will sit on 30 acres at the corner of Lincoln Way and Beach Avenue, just off the southeast corner of the Iowa State University campus. It should be completed in 1969. Credit for the Iowa State Center will go to many men in the years to come, but in the beginning it was one man who had an idea some 10 years ago. Dr. Hilton, over in these acres now occupied by cattle and animals, horses, there's going to be a lot of brick and mortar go up here. How long is it going to take for the whole thing?
Well, of course, depends on how rapidly we're able to get the rest of the money needed to finish the center. But I would say it would take somewhere between 5 or 6 years to have all of the buildings up. We'll start the auditorium this late winter, fall. Actually, we planned to start it this fall, but the architects just simply aren't ready with their plans. We will start the auditorium in late winter or early spring, and it'll be about 2 years from the time we start before that's ready. And then the big Coliseum will take another 2.5 years to build. The auditorium, of course, will go right here in this area. The little theater over here on where this pile of dirt now is. The big Coliseum will go down in this area, between here and those woods. And the continuing education center up and down this.
So that's Lincoln Way,
First
right
will be
along
the
there.
auditorium, then the Coliseum, and then, I'm not sure yet which of the other buildings will start next, but probably will both be started about the same time.
Dr. Hilton, what do you think this complex is going to mean for the university in its role within the state?
Well, we're, of course, located about the center of the state. People can come into Iowa State, spend a few hours or a few days very easily. And I think it will provide an opportunity for the university to extend its service to all people of Iowa in every imaginable type of discipline that we offer here on the campus. But it will do more than that. It will provide our students with an opportunity to develop their own talents. It will provide an opportunity for the students to see and to observe and to participate in many of the performing arts. It will provide an opportunity for the staff to enjoy some of the finer things of the cultural center, cultural areas of the work of the university and their own interests. It will do many things. I think it will give Iowa State the proper dimension that we need. That's the way I felt from the very beginning.
When you started in the beginning, how did you start? How do you start a large project like this? It must seem like a massive, almost
Well,
impossible
the first thing I
undertaking.
did, I conceived the idea. Then I asked the Department of Architecture to sketch out a series of buildings. And we sketched out an auditorium, a coliseum, a continuing education center, and a little theater. And then in the discussions that ensued for a few years after that, we tried out ideas on a round building that did not work, and we finally came back to the 4 units that we have now. But to go back, those were the plans. We had to have something to look at, to portray to the people just what I had in mind. And then, of course, the job was to get some of our prominent alumni, whom I knew had a real interest in the university, who were loyal, and who had some funds to help, and to sell them on the idea, and to convince them that the state had a tremendous load to carry financially to provide classroom and laboratory buildings and staff and salaries for staff, and that we would have to get this through gifts and grants and bequests. Once we got that, and we got 7 or 8 or 9 to start with, and then I think we moved it up to about 17, and then 28. Now we have about 61 of our prominent alumni throughout the United States.
Well, I would imagine you encountered many problems in this whole effort. Could you...
Oh, yeah, sure, because the problems with these, that's a whale of a lot of money. Why can't the state do it? We pay money for taxes, and we feel that the support should go only to the private institutions, and there's nothing against supporting private institutions. It was a job to sell the people on the full significance and importance of the project. It was a problem to sell the people from whom we have gotten our money, the needs for supporting a public university like Iowa State University. But they have supported it, and they've done very well by it.
I imagine you're a very proud man over this whole thing, because you've been very instrumental in the building, the planning, the
Of course, I am very pleased with it, but the thing that I appreciate most of all, and the thing that everybody must appreciate, that we never could have had the center had it not been for these fine alumni who have so unselfishly and who have spent so much of their time helping with the campaign. And again, I want to pay high tribute to C.Y. Stevens, who gave us the first big gift, got the program, got the campaign off the ground. Sam Hamilton, Harold Brenton, Porter Jarvis, Bill Fisher, I could name dozens.
Go on for a long time.
Yes.
Well, how about the people who will be using the center, the students, the people of Iowa and everything? What will they be seeing here? What will they be doing here?
Well, of course, in the auditorium, that's the first building will be used by the students, the staff, people in Iowa, and they'll have an opportunity to see some of the leading plays in the country, some of the best-known artists, performing artists, In the little theater, the building we go over here, the smaller of the 4 buildings, will be primarily for students in their training, developing of their talents. It will be called an experimental theater. Now the big Coliseum, of course, will be used by every imaginable group of people, students, the staff, the people in Iowa, for things like I mentioned earlier in the discussion of commencements, Visha, Christmas Festival of Music, and I suppose in time to come they'll be playing basketball games in this big The continuing education will be used largely by the staff and the general public in keeping their education up to date, and keeping their knowledge up to date.
Well, it's a great thing, Dr. Hilton. Did you ever worry that maybe it might not happen?
Oh, there was some, no, I worried about the slowness of which the funds were coming in, but I never questioned once with what we have this summer.
All right, so we'll make our way to stage. So that's about a 30-minute video, and the next clip shows the press conference for the groundbreaking. And it has, I believe, Mr. Hamilton in it. It's got the Board of Regents president. It's got President Parks, who was probably within his first year of presidency, and Warren can probably confirm that. And then Mrs. Mary Ann Stevens, Mrs. C.Y. Stevens spoke as well. By the time they broke ground, Mr. Stevens had already been killed in I thought it was a motorcycle accident, but I read, I think there's some out there, it was a motorcycle or an automobile accident, but he died in 1963. And so he did not see the groundbreaking, but his wife and several family members were at the groundbreaking. So I'm going to turn it over to Warren now to kind of talk. He was actually around in those days as a student, I think, before he started working, but all along in that same time frame. So Warren's going to talk to you a little bit about kind of being on campus during that time and through the years, what it's meant, what Iowa State Center has meant to Iowa State University.
Thanks, Tammy. Yeah, she's got the mic on. That's usually not a problem with my voice. I'm pleased to be down here tonight. As some of the early slides, I think, showed, this is the 50th anniversary of Stevens Auditorium. And I have been around during all of the actual construction and development of that. Bev and I spent the last 62 years, as it's turning out, in the same environment. So it's been a great experience, and we're continuing to enjoy being engaged in a variety of things. When I came back to Iowa State, well, I'll back up. I came here with Bev in 1957 as an undergraduate student. This project in the Iowa State Center had been talked about. Hilton was the university president then, and when I was a student during that period of years, I think in 1954, he actually sort of surfaced his vision of the Iowa State Center, as you saw in that clip. At one level, it wasn't a new idea. The first idea of building some kind of an auditorium actually occurred in 1901, when President Beecher, tried to figure out where he could put 1,000 students at Iowa State in one place so they could have, discussions and events. And back then, there was actually some religious activities that students were expected to participate in. So they had been talking about doing something in Iowa State for a long, long time. And, 2 world wars and all the things that happened, the Depression slowed all this down. But, something like 65 years later, they got started on this planning. And as Hilton's comments indicated, it replaced some facilities on campus. When I was a student, the Armory, which some of you looking around I suspect have been in, was the place not only for athletic events, but commencements and concerts and all of that. It was a tinny building with metal bleachers, and it was what it was. It was an armory. So Hilton really, conceived we needed to do this, and as he indicated, concluded the only way to get it done was through philanthropy and private fundraising. And he really was instrumental in developing what is today the Iowa State Foundation. Back in that period, public universities were not as engaged in fundraising as they are today. And so this was pretty unusual. He got started, and the Iowa State Foundation was being created. Back then, administrators like President Hilton, when they became 65, had to step down from those kind of administrative responsibilities, but typically worked another 4 or 5 years. And so when he retired in 1965, he actually became the first director of development for the foundation and really launched a fundraising program that ended up in the Iowa State Center being constructed. Stevens Auditorium was the first building. The foundation board, and he mentioned the names of many of those people, and I had the opportunity to know and be engaged with most of them, were business executives. One of the things they were pretty good at was building buildings in their corporate experience. So this was a project they got pretty enthused about. They selected some architects. There were 2 firms actually that designed this, Kreitz and McConnell, which were pretty creative architects, and were actually at that point working out of Cedar Rapids. And then Brooks Board and Skiles, which was a Des Moines architect firm, which was more of a practical kind of architect. But anyway, they teamed up. Stevens Auditorium, at the time we did this, cost $4.5 million. That's a pretty modest amount when you look at today's construction costs. As President Hilton indicated, the first major gift was $1 million from Steve Y. Stevens. He made his fortune by operating the dairy in the Washington, D.C. area. And as Tammy indicated, he unfortunately was killed in an automobile accident in 1963. So he never really saw the building, but it moved forward, it was constructed, and as many of you know, several years ago, it was named the Iowa Architectural Building of the Century, which is pretty remarkable for a building that was constructed in the 60s to end up at the end of the 19th or end of the 20th century to be designated that way. It's a remarkable building, both architecturally and programmatically. I came, and back in 1966, I was a young staff member, and I had the privilege of working on the building planning with the people that Hilton mentioned and the people in the university facility area, and my predecessors, a man by the name of Platt, and then Wayne Moore, who some of you may have known. And so we had a chance to be part of the planning process. We were present in 1969 when it's opened, and obviously during the next 50 years we've had the chance to attend events of all kinds down there. And it's been a wonderful experience. I think as I've looked over my career, of all the things that Iowa State has done that have probably changed the image of the institution, the Iowa State Center and Stevens Auditorium have done probably as much as any single thing at that period of time. We also benefited from the fact that the KRT Theater, which had been the Des Moines Performing Arts facility, closed. Civic Center hadn't been built, and so over a period of years, really the cultural center was here in Ames with the Iowa State Center and Stevens Auditorium. President Park succeeded Hilton and was really the administrator that got the center built. The original governors, as I said, were a special group of people. So we had a chance to do that. It's been an interesting experience, and some of you may have heard this story before. As the building was going to be opened that fall, they wanted to have a major event. The head of the music department then was a man by the name of Alvin Edgar, and back then they were heads, not chairs, so he sort of was in this position. And he talked with Hilton and Parks about what are we going to do, and he went off to New York City, and they knew he was going to talk with people. But anyway, he was in New York City for a week. And during that week, he contracted for the New York Philharmonic Orchestra to come to Ames and play 5 concerts. He didn't get approval from anybody. He signed his contract, and he came back, and I was in the business office, and he came in and said, I made this contract to have them come and do 5 performances. The business people at Iowa State went ballistic because they thought, we'll never fill that auditorium up for 5 concerts. We can't afford this. You didn't have the money. How is this going to get paid for? Well, as you know, if you were around or have seen any of this, it turned out that was a great success. Philharmonic came, they did those 5 concerts. That was really the beginning of the Ames International Orchestra Festival Association. And we've had great programming since. The concerts were well done. Sacco was a conductor who has gone on to be famous. Someplace in some of those video pieces or clips, he had the New York Philharmonic had a softball team, and they played a group of intramural students in softball. And as a conductor, he was playing, and he slid into one of the bases and threw his back out. And so if you watch the last couple of concerts, he actually conducted those sitting on a stool on the stage, and he actually has had some back challenges, I think, during much of his professional career. That happened because he was playing baseball at Iowa State with a group of students. And if you're around, the orchestra members who predominantly were from New York had never been out in Iowa, and so they got out on farms and they got to see, part of the Midwest that they don't usually get to do, and were in one place for 5, concerts. So it was really a remarkable event. Certainly, I know many of you have been to all the kinds of things that are going on down, not only in Stevens, but the other center buildings. So it's been a remarkable addition to Iowa State. It's played a major role, as I've said, in transitioning Iowa State from the image in what was an agricultural college to a world-class university. And today, we continue to be, you can look at all these rankings that are out there, we're in the top 10 on a whole variety of different ways Iowa State gets ranked. And I think the Iowa State Center and Stevens Auditorium are contributors to what makes this a very special university and community. I'm sure it's exceeded Hilton's and Stevens' expectations when they conceived this in the 1950s. It's a pretty remarkable project for 2 guys who were animal science majors to create this kind of a facility and that was really the connection between Hilton and Stevens. They both, were animal science people and knew something about cows and dairy cows, as I understand that connection. But the programming has been remarkable. I've had the opportunity to be the administrative place the center's reported over the last 2 years. We've had wonderful management teams. I was around the decision-making to get Venue Works, which was mentioned as a local group. Steve Peters, who is the chief operating officer or major person at Venue Works, was one of the center managers in those early years. And, he created a company. Tammy has been a great addition to the center staff down there in the last several years. So it's been a great experience. There have been wonderful events, wonderful concerts. One of the stories I tell in the years I was there, with all these orchestras that have come through, there was a student who graduated from Iowa State and went off to college. I think it was Stanford or UCLA. Anyway, she was in some kind of a music appreciation class in someplace, and that faculty member asked students to raise their hands if they listened to orchestras, and she kept sticking her hand up in the air. And when he got done with his list, he said, "You must be from New York or a place like that to have listened to all those orchestras." And she said, "No, I grew up in Ames, Iowa," and they all came through the Iowa State Center. So we provided a remarkable experience, not only for most of us that are probably on the other edge of the age spectrum, but for all those young people. And I think that's one of the remarkable things they're still doing down there, is trying to engage programs for young people to have a chance to be exposed with various kinds of workshops and music programs. So it's been a great experience. Not only is it a remarkable building, but I think the programming over the past 50+ years, it brought a really wide variety of events. That industry has changed over time, but they have been really creative and attracting and bringing people to Ames. And we happen to live kind of south of the Iowa State Center area, but I can really leave my living room, 15 minutes later be sitting in Stevens Auditorium ready for an event. I grew up in the Chicago area and was back there working before I came back to Iowa State. And if you're in an urban area like that, to go downtown to a concert or a performance was a 2-hour commitment by the time you commuted, parked your car, and got to the venue. And ticket prices were way more expensive. this has been a remarkable opportunity for all of us that are in the Ames area for Iowa State. So that's my sort of start. It's been a fun experience and it's had a big impact on the university, the community in Central Iowa. So Tammy,
Great. Yeah, I have so many things pinging in my brain based on what you said, so I'm trying to kind of pull it all together. I'll start with a few fun facts. So as we talked about construction, the 4.9 million, 13,000 cubic yards of concrete that was actually poured into wood. And so when you go in, if you haven't noticed before, the wood grain on the concrete, and that's true in all 4 buildings of the Iowa State Center. It was all poured the same way. Mostly at Hilton it's covered up now, but certainly in Stevens, Fisher, and Sheeman, you'll see, next time you're in there, take a close look and you'll see that it's kind of wood grained. They had specially paneled and angled the sidewalls near the stage for acoustic reasons, and also the hemlock ceiling near the front of the stage is all for acoustic based. So you'll hear a lot of times we talk about, well, any of you who have been in the building and used the steps, all the steps are kind of angled a little bit differently. Everything was kind of built inside the house around the acoustics, right? So we have the curved portions that you see are cedar, and then we have the rest of the finishings are all in oak. He mentioned the architects. They had a creative one and a practical one. Neither of them apparently ever wanted to use the bathroom very often. You know, they might have thought about building a few more of those, right? Yes. Still today, 50 years later, I talk Warren, I was fortunate enough to work under Warren when I first came to the university, and I'm not sure we ever had a meeting that we didn't talk about bathrooms, because we always talked about it. So
you have to remember back then the enrollment was like 80% male, and I think there weren't any standards and all the rest of it, and so they probably reflected kind of the environment they were expecting, but it's been a challenge.
Yeah. So we have around the room, after we get done talking, we'd love to have you take a look. We have some of our fun facts from our 50th anniversary party that we had last September. We did tour stops, and so we went ahead and brought all of our signs with our tour stops, and there's lots of fun information on those as well. And some of it may be what I'm going to tell you now. We have 55 line sets on the stage. The pit holds 125 musicians. It is on a hydraulic system. It's a system that the musicians can come in at the ground floor level where their warm-up room is, and then we can lift them up actually on the stage to where they want to be. And that is an original system. So it's held up well. So it holds 125 musicians, instruments, plus a grand piano. So that's how big it is. It's a big pit. In fact, I think in some of my research, they said that the New York Philharmonic pit or Lincoln Center pit only holds 85 musicians. So we have a nice sized, again, no bathrooms, but a big orchestra pit. So we're also one of the few buildings that actually has a piece of art for a theater curtain. And in fact, I say one of a few, I can't name another one, and I've done not a whole lot of research, but enough research to know that it is very unique. So our curtain is called Silver Code. Yes, I know we don't have it down for every show, and I'm sorry. Come to Nutcracker. It's always down for Nutcracker. Because of how the curtain is, most of our shows actually are pushing into that space, so we can't get it up and down without it hitting either stage sets, especially for Broadway, or if we have contemporary shows, it's tough too because they've set some of their sound out. So that's why you don't see the Silver Code all the time. It really is based on the show that we have in there. But it was commissioned by Bill and Dorothea Fisher. It's again in 1969 to at least 1975, it weighed 5,600 pounds, and then at some point it now weighs 3,000 pounds. Because that's what it shows on the university website and on our thing. So as I was looking, I'm like, went on a diet. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't after the museum restored it in 2015, but it took $36,000 to design, weave, and transport and install into Stevens in 1969. $20,500 for the curtain. It's an 85 by 35 piece of art made up mostly of cloth, let's see here, textiles, and spun rayon, nylon, polyvinyl, chloride film, and polyester film. Mylar is what some of it is. I swear to God, it's Mylar. It looks like that must have been when, you know, the astronauts were going to the moon, and it must have been a new fabric then. But so it traveled. It was woven in Kyoto, Japan, because that had the world's longest continuous loom, large enough to do this. It traveled by ship through Panama Canal, up the East Coast, across the Lawrence Seaway to Chicago, and then to Ames on a special truck. So that was its path to Stevens Auditorium. It can be raised into the fly space without being folded, and it has to be manually lifted by at least 2 people. We must have gotten stronger because in all the past ones it was 3 to 4 people, but we must have gotten sturdier because it only really takes us 2. So that's really some interesting information about the building itself. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the shows we've had. I did a little bit of research over the past couple days. Well, we did a lot in September, and then we were joined at that event by Joe Romano and Steve Peters, both who are 2 former executive directors of the building. Both now work for Vineyards. In fact, Mark North, who was the 4th director right before me, myself, Steve, and Joe all worked for a company called Ogden Entertainment. And that was the company that when the university decided to privatize the management of the Iowa State Center, they were hired. It was a New York company. And then through the years, Steve went off in Ames, Iowa, decided to do his own thing and start his own management company. I actually worked in Cedar Rapids during that time when I was Ogden, and the other 3 gentlemen were over here. Steve and Joe were my VPs when I worked in the Ogden world, and then went to work for Steve when he won the account in Cedar Rapids. But I think it's very interesting that all 4 of the 5 executive directors all worked for the same company at one time. That kind of tells you a little bit about what the venue management world is like. But we had Mark and Steve on the stage with us, along with Jeff Johnson, and we had a lot of stories that were told because we have a lot of history. So I didn't have to do as much work the last time because I had their brain trust with me. So I went ahead and did a little bit of research, and by 1978, Stevens had hosted the New York Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, Boston Symphony, Boston Pop Symphony, London Symphony, Leningrad Philharmonic, Chicago Symphony, Australian Youth Symphony, Concertgebouw, Orchestra of Amsterdam, and the Vienna Philharmonic. So just on the orchestral side, by 1978, we had hosted all of those. So I went back and looked, and you can see I did bring, just so you know, that I really tried my hardest. Brought my sheet of my checks. We have hosted 165 orchestral performances by either chamber orchestras or full orchestras, and 115 visits by 63 different orchestras. I mean, how astounding is that for Ames, Iowa, right? The New York Phil was here for 8 performances and 4 visits. The Philadelphia Orchestra was here for 11 performances and 6 visits. And the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra was here for 12 performances and 3 visits. All of those were in the early days, the 69 to about 75, 74, I think. And then just a little under a month ago, we hosted our first major American orchestra in almost 20 years, the San Francisco Symphony, which was their first trip here. Yet there's a connection because, I'm not going to say his name right, Ozawa Zawaki?
Seiji Ozawa.
There you go. Yeah, thank you. He left right after he conducted the New York Phil. He had been named the music director of the San Francisco Symphony. And Michael Tilson Thomas, who is now the music director and will be retiring after this year, after 23 years as the music director, actually performed twice here with the LA Philharmonic and the Boston Symphony. So we even had a lot of connections right there. Plus we had two Iowans, native Iowans, and who play in the San Francisco Symphony. John Engelklaas from Parkersburg. He's a trombonist, and he's really the reason we got the San Francisco Symphony. They were looking for a third place to stop. They needed to fill out a weekend run, so that's why they became affordable to us, because they needed some place to sit for a day before they went back to San Francisco. And John came to the opening concerts in 1969 with his mom when he was a junior high student or a high school student. And it was life-changing for him. So in fact, he told us a story when he was here in Ames this last time about being in Vienna and meeting with some of the concert musicians over there. And they were just talking about the different places they had played and where their favorite place was. And it came up that, okay, so in the United States, what's your favorite place? And one of the musicians said Ames. Not only were the acoustics some of the best that we've ever played in, but the people were fabulous. So again, one of those stories about, it is a small world, and Stevens really has impacted a lot of lives. Jacob Nisley was from Grimes. He played at Stevens as a high school student. He's a younger gentleman. And he loved coming back. In fact, they presented him, Maestro presented him with an Iowa State hat. They did an encore specifically so he could play, because the pieces they played he wasn't performing in. So that was, kind of a nod to, again, the people of Ames. So that was very nice. So 4 times we've had these artists. Harry Connick Jr. John Denver is in this category as 4 times, but he was only scheduled 3 times. Now, does anybody know why he was only scheduled 3 times? Winner, chicken dinner, and why?
Because E.J. Thomas couldn't come because his son was sick.
That's right. That's right. So the story goes is it was a Saturday show, and John Denver was sitting in the Minneapolis airport getting ready to fly back home to Colorado, and he got a call from the agent, and they, I believe he drove down to Ames and played, and he got up on stage and said, "I'm going to play a medley of my one song." Because he did not have very many songs out, apparently, at that time. But we will take credit for his start, because obviously he came back 3 times, and he actually came back to Hilton, I think, once or twice, and played at Hilton as well. So he's one of our 4-timers. 4 times we've had these following comedians: Gallagher, George Carlin, and Ron White. And Ron White's been here 2 of the times since I've been here. So he's kind of a newer entry into our timeline. Sarah is back here. She runs our Martha Ellen Ty School Matinee Series. 4 times we've had Jeannie V. Jones and Very Hungry Caterpillar. And I'll do a pitch real quick for our, we just announced our series last night. Very Hungry Caterpillar will be back for our 5th time, and it's part of our season this year upcoming. And then Hal Holbrook doing Mark Twain. So I just heard a Hal Holbrook story yesterday from Jake Ewald. If any of you have been around the building, Jake has been there since the beginning as well, and will be retiring soon. We're very sad about that. He's our sound guy, and he tells the story of Hal telling him that Ames always got 10 to 15 minutes more of show than anyone else on his tour because of the acoustics. He liked hearing himself talk so much that the show got longer. So even though he's here 4 times, it's almost like he was here 5 times, because apparently he got 10 to 15 minutes more. So 5 times on Broadway, Annie, West Side Story, and Jesus Christ Superstar has been here 4 times, along with Joffrey Ballet and Madame Butterfly. Canadian Brass has been here 5 times, but will be here a 6th time, December 3rd. buy tickets. Capitol Steps 5 times, and Mannheim Steamroller 5 times. 6 times, Ballet Folklorico, Marceau, Vienna Boys Choir, and the King Singers, who were just here last February, was their 6th time. 7 times. Okay, I thought when I got to this guy that it's like there's nobody that has played more than 7 times. I was wrong. But it was so impressive that I wrote it down because I have never heard of this person. So I want to show of hands how many of you have heard of Fred Waring and his Pennsylvanians. Oh my God! I have to go YouTube him now. Seriously. He was here in 70, 72, 74, 75, 76, 77, 79. That group averaged 2,500 people a show at an average price of $5 a ticket. So maybe that was it too. But it was early on, so I am going to Google him now. And then Preservation Hall Jazz was here 7 times. And 9 times, now this will be interesting to see if you guys have been to this concert before. How many of you have been to a Widespread Panic concert? All right, we got, well, you were working. So, all right, we got one day. All right, Widespread Panic. Yeah, it's the modern Dead, Grateful Dead, kind of. So you guys can Google when you get home. But anybody want? I'm trying to figure out which stat to give you first. If I want you to try to guess the artist or the number of times. So I'll just tell you, there's no guessing. We have had Lori Line 19 times. Twice in 1 year. Her very first year she played in April, and then you must have loved her so much she came back for Christmas, and then she played 15 years straight. And then took a break of a year, and then came back for 2 years. I think her last time was 2012. And I do know her because I used to play her in Cedar Rapids. I used to work those shows, and I do have her Threads by Love CD that I do like. So, and I have all her Christmas stuff too. So Lori Line I did know. So there's a couple facts about, or some fun facts about some of our events. And then if Steve was here, he would tell you this story. He told it the night, I've heard it many times, so I can almost tell it, but I brought it was even so impressive, they wrote a newspaper article about it, so I have all the facts. So in February of 1985, it was February, so it was snowy. Wow, surprise, surprise. Royal Philharmonic Orchestra of London was coming. How many of you had tickets to see that? Anybody here? A few people? All right. They were scheduled for 2 shows, a Friday and a Saturday, and they got stuck in Detroit, fogged in Detroit. And there was chaos everywhere in the skies. The houses for both nights were sold out. Ames International Orchestra Festival Association had set up a bunch of house parties, lots of receptions. There was a special brunch on Saturday morning. And so a thick fog blanketed the northern states in that early morning, and Menhuin and the 98-member orchestra were fog-bound at Detroit Airport. So Steve did make the decision to cancel on Friday night because they couldn't get in. So he worked with Frankie Olson and Wayne Davis. Gil Draper and Mary Alice Carpenter were with IOFA, and John Dasher in trying to get the orchestra here. Somebody knew, I'm looking for that name, somebody knew the president of Northwest Airlines. I think it was would have been the ambassador from Great Britain. I think that's how it goes. Let's see here. Here we go. The British Consul General, Gordon Jukes, telephoned the office of the president of Northwest Airlines. And then Wayne Davis was a retired Army Reserve colonel, and he sought the help of the Iowa State University's professor of air science, Colonel Charles E. Malcolm, in trying to obtain an Air Force plane. I mean, really, we are really trying to figure out a way to get this done. And What I really like to tell you is, especially based on that 1965 video, that it was a woman who happened to pull it off, not a man. So, yeah, let's hear it. Dorothy Schumer. How many of you know Dorothy Schumer? Yes, Dorothy Schumer with Worldwide Travel Center finally located a DC-9 jet and a crew on the East Coast, somewhere in the Carolinas. They flew it to Detroit. Funding was an important consideration. Again, I don't think anybody had any okay to spend the money to rent the plane, but we got them here on Saturday, and the orchestra was so happy they played on their day off. I mean, they really had a day off in the airport on Friday, but they stayed to play on Sunday for us and did not take their normal day off for their scheduled travel day. So again, just this is a quote from Steve Peters. It says, "Tired and relieved and still feeling goose flesh from the Sunday opening brass and percussion flourish fanfare for the common man. The staff regrouped on Monday to a sly note from Peters. The vice president of Columbia Artists called to express regrets he couldn't get a flight out of New York in time to see the performances, he told them. I asked him where he'd like me to send the plane." Yep, so another great story. I think at this point, we'll take some questions. If anybody has any questions, because we're about 10 minutes till 8, so we do have a mic. If anybody has any questions or...
Hello, do you have any more information about the gift from Australia to the United States in 1976? That's when the Australian Youth Orchestra came here.
I do not.
Okay.
I mean, that's absolutely something. Leave your name with us afterwards, and we can look it up. We brought a bunch of archived information. We have a history committee, so we can delegate some of that. History committee. Is anybody from the history committee in here? It's a volunteer community committee for us. But no, I don't, and I did not have any. I don't think I saw anything on that, but we have lots of stuff. So. Does anybody here know the answer to that? 76. All right, Stumper.
I have two questions from the 70s. I was at Iowa State in the late 70s, and we were paying off Hilton. I believe it was President Parks convinced the students to vote in a service fee. I don't know how long it went, but that was one of the things we were supposed to be proud of, that this was all funded by, they kind of told us it was all funded by students. They didn't say anybody else kicked in any money, which I'm sure isn't true, but I think that went on for 10 to 15 years. And the other thing that I was told is that ground at the Iowa State Center is not too stable, and that C.Y. Stevens is on some pylons that they had to put down quite far so it would sit on bedrock, so it's kind of a tree house with dirt around it, is the way they explained it.
Yeah, I can answer some of that. You're generally correct. Hilton Coliseum was done with a student fee issue. The students, wanted to move basketball and things out of the Armory, and so at the time Hilton was a $6.5 to $7 million project. They, as they do today, passed a student fee. Bonds were using the fee to pay off the bonds. Actually, it was a 20-year bond issue. The other three buildings at the center, Stevens Auditorium, Fisher Theater, and the Sheeman Continuing Education Building, were all done through private fundraising, pretty much. The auditorium, Stevens really got done without too much challenge. Fisher Theater, the Fisher governor was a Marshalltown, major business, was a major contributor at that point in time. Sheeman was a little more of a challenge to get it all financed, and I'm a good business officer. We got it all worked out, but they had some challenges. The Bernier Auditorium, if you've been in that, which is now being renovated right at the moment, was originally to be they were going to have a dining facility in that space. And Bernier he died and left this collection. And so the university decided to create, in essence, the Brunier Museum versus more dining space. And so the Sheeman continues to be challenged by having the right mix of meeting rooms. But that's how it all got funded. You're correct that that area, a large part of the center site is floodplain. And in order to, anchor the foundations, they did have to dig down in certain areas. I suspect today, if you wanted to build a center at a site like that, it would be much more challenging to get the permits you need from the DNR and the people to build buildings in the floodplain. As some of you, I think, were around, we've had 2 or 3 incidents where water has breached that area. Hilton, in '93 had water. The problem was the water as it ran down the Squaw Creek had high currents, and it undercut the concrete in the asphalt that was outside of that ramp that goes down into Hilton. So all the barricading we did had worked, but it basically washed out the concrete asphalt under the entryway, and then 30 million gallons of water went down inside the building, and we all stood there and watched that happen, and then had water up to the basketball backboards inside. We've since, in the last few years, we think we flood-proofed those buildings, and we went around and we've reinforced the concrete and the outsides. And I think even today, if you go into Sheeman, they've got some of the supporting members where they would put panels where the doors and things are. And we relocated a lot of the electrical equipment and heating and ventilating, out of areas that would be flooded. But we think it's flood-proof now, but who knows what can happen in the watershed areas and feed that area.
Yeah, I would just say that Brunier came in, it must have been late in the construction because we have the walls up there are cut for serving dining students. And that, I think, in this renovation of Brunier is being taken out of that area. And yeah, we do, we like to think that they're kind of our works of art, but we have, this past year we kept it up year round. We do have a mechanism that we set up in front of the north and south doors of Sheeman only, and that we then slide floodgates into. But we were still under a threat of flooding as late as November last year. And then I was in, mid-March, I was in San Diego at a conference and got the call that we were getting ready to, the call had come out to say, prepare for, just make sure you get all your people trained, and when we tell you have to drop your floodgates and you're ready to go. So I don't think Stevens has never flooded. They've got some storm sewer backup that we watch. Anytime we get a heavy rain, we're sending somebody down there to close that. So anytime there's any kind of significant precipitation, we are really on full alert.
Stevens and Fish are high enough, they're really above the flood levels that would happen. Hilton and Sheeman are the 2 buildings you have to worry about. And we've redone Hilton too. All that equipment's been moved up onto those lower levels.
I've got some, this on?
Yeah.
Okay. I've got some nitty-gritty about the early stages of planning of the center, if we got 5 minutes to tell the story. As you might imagine, a project of that magnitude has some interesting parts behind it. And I worked for Ray Kreitz, who was the architect of the Iowa State Center, in the 70s, and that was after the center had been designed and built, and a lot of it built. So the story that I have to tell is information I got from Ray, as well as I got from the head of the physical plant at that time. If you have any, or if you have high regard for James H. Hilton, you ought to raise it even higher. He was the man who had the image of Iowa State Center. Essentially at that time, I wasn't around, I was around but not in college in the 50s. This was a cow college. You sent your sons and daughters to Iowa, you and your pigs and cows to Iowa State. It was an ag college, it was a tech college. Hilton had the vision that we needed a center to really raise the image, and there's no other university in America that's got a center like Iowa State's got. We should be incredibly proud of that. Also, a great deal of credit goes to Bill Fisher, who was Fisher governor. At that time, his mother, Grandma Fisher, was the major contributor to the New York Opera, was the biggest contributor to New York Opera. Hilton got a hold of Fisher and said, what do you think of this plan? Fisher liked it and said, here's $1 million. I'm going to call up my friend C.Y. Stevens. And shortly thereafter, C.Y. tossed in $1 million. They hired an architect that was Brooks, Borg and Skiles, which was the offshoot of the Proudfoot firm who had done Beard, Sheridan, Curtis, and so forth. But it was nowhere near the firm that had been at the time those buildings were done. They designed the buildings, and Hilton showed them to Bill Fisher. Bill Fisher said, I don't know if I like them or not. I'm going to call up my friend Ray Kreitz and see what he thinks of them. Kreitz said they're terrible. So essentially what Fisher said to Hilton was, you want my money, you get my architect. Kreitz was probably 35, 37 years old at the time, but he was good. He was really good. So they'd already had a contract with Brooks, Borg and Skiles, so the way they worked around it was that Kreitz and McConnell would do the schematic design, Brooks, Borg and Skiles would do a lot of the engineering work that went into the complex. Kreitz designed the buildings. He designed the model. He presented the model to the university hierarchy. They had some time ahead of time to look over the plans. And essentially, it was a brochure that everybody got, and they met in the conference room in Beardshire. And the model was sitting in the middle of the table, and everybody had a glass of water, and the bureaucrats at the university were loaded for bear. They said, look at all that glass in C.Y. Stevens. Somebody's going to have to wash all that glass. Board form concrete, that's a low quality material. It either has to be Indiana limestone or brick. We're not going to have any concrete. You got carpet in there? We don't have carpet in the university. We're not going to maintain carpet. And it went on and on. They picked away at it and picked away at it and picked away at it. And finally Kreitz got so mad that he beat his fist on the table. Here's where it gets a little bit graphic, folks. He said, you guys wouldn't recognize good design if it rose up and bit you in the ass. The custodial services are not going to design these buildings. And he turned to Fisher and he says, I'm taking my model and getting out of here. And Fisher says, I'll help you carry the model out. On the way out, Fisher turns around to Hilton and essentially says, this project's dead. And out the door they went. Hilton calls up Fisher the next day, says, what's it going to take? And Fisher says, we can't do it within the political aspects of the university at this time. We'll raise the money. We'll form a board of governors. We'll raise the money and we'll build the buildings. You're out of it. And pretty much the group of financiers raised the money. C.Y. kept his money in, Fisher kept his money in. But it was Hilton, and I give a lot of credit to Ray Kreitz for standing up for his design. And frankly, if you look at that building and say, okay, this was done by a Cedar Rapids architect who graduated from Iowa State University. It's selected as the premier building in Iowa in the 20th century. We have in Iowa buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, Harrison Abramowitz, Louis Sullivan, Eero Saarinen, Elio Saarinen. Give me about 5 minutes and I'll come up with one of the Frank Gehry, I.M. Pei. These are internationally known phenomenal architects, and I give all of them credit. But we got to give Ray Christ credit. That building, I think, is worth that. And every time I go into that building, and I went into it after getting out of the Army in the early 70s, going into that building and thinking this is phenomenal, and I feel exactly the same way 50 years later.
One more question before we wrap up? Oh, right here.
Just another little sidelight on the original construction. When they started before they poured footings, they had to do some soil stabilization. The original borings were all done. They need stabilization. They call it mud jacking. They pump the ground full of material that sets up. Well, W.G. Jacobs' company out of Des Moines is doing the mud jacking. I happened to be with Ames Engineering here in Ames at the time. They pumped for days. Nothing showed up. So they started at the building site and worked their way east. And after a while, they discovered that grout was coming out at the river location. So, there you go.
Great. Well, just to close, as I said, we've got some information around. We've got some of our articles, some programs. You saw the first picture in that video when I said, take a look at what Hilton looked like. It doesn't look anything like it looks now. We've got that brochure back there when they were first pitching Iowa State Center to the donors. We also have Rice Krispie treats for you. And the reason we do Rice Krispie treats is, I don't know how many of you know, but Mildred Day, an ISU alumnus, developed the recipe when she worked for Kellogg's in 1939, and it's been on the Rice Krispie box ever since. And so we at the center, when our artists come in, we do our kitchen. It's our executive chef and kitchen staff that does it. We design custom Rice Krispie treats. So when we had Wizard of Oz and we did the Red Shoes, we just did a possum because the group Need to Breathe were from Possum Kingdom, South Carolina. We did a Motown record. We did so we brought some tonight. So there's turtle Rice Krispie treats. There's cranberry, almond, I believe, and then just plain ones. So that's the story of the Rice Krispie treats. We usually have our little, we give the artists with a little history card that talks all about Mildred Day and how proud we are of that. So I'd like to leave you with a quote actually from Mary Ann Stevens. At the building dedication, which just so happened to be on my 5th birthday, on June 6, 1969, she expressed her hopes that within the walls of C.Y. Stevens Auditorium, countless persons will experience a newborn appreciation for the performing arts in decades to come. There could be no more fitting tribute to the memory of my husband, who discovered his love of theater as a student on this campus more than 4 decades ago. So we still try to embody his thoughts today as we continue to share our love of performing arts and all the things that we bring. Sarah's handing me a note. We did have some sheets of paper. If you would like to share your Stevens story with us, we'd really appreciate that. We do have it online as well, and we do have a number of 50th anniversary videos. Warren's in a couple, I'm in a couple, Louis Bennett's in a couple, who else? Frankie Olson, yeah, Beverly's in one. So they're on our website. If you just go to center.iastate.edu and click our 50th anniversary button, you'll see them. So we invite you to go that and learn more.
But yeah, if you have a story that you want to share about Stevens and your favorite memories, or if you have a question about something that's gone on, we would be happy to take those too, but this is a nice vehicle for that.
Great.